In the next 5 years, the ability to detect lies will become the most valuable skill you can have. Because we live in an era where manipulators have easy access to persuasion techniques, false narrative construction, and public speaking, they're increasingly prepared and their techniques increasingly advanced. And if you don't develop a solid verification method now that doesn't depend on intuition or visual cues, you'll spend the next years being manipulated by people who master these techniques. The good news? The method already exists. Machiavelli, Schopenhauer, and Nietzsche developed it over centuries. 5 questions that attack the only thing no liar can fabricate perfectly: logical coherence under specific detail. Today you'll learn this complete protocol. Have you noticed how some people lie looking straight into your eyes? How they answer without hesitation, without stuttering, without looking away? This happens because you were taught to look for the wrong signs: body language, nervousness, micro-expressions. All of this can be trained, controlled, faked. Professional liars know exactly what you're looking for, and that's why they pass through all these filters effortlessly. The mistake most people make is trying to detect lies through emotional reactions. But Machiavelli discovered something far more effective during his years as a diplomat in Florence. He didn't observe how people reacted, he observed what they avoided saying. Because every lie, no matter how well constructed, has one inevitable characteristic: it needs vagueness to survive. Truths can be detailed, lies cannot. When someone actually experienced something, that person can describe the exact sequence of events. What happened first? What came after? Where each moment connects to the next. But when someone is inventing, that person builds a general narrative, loose, full of empty spaces they hope you won't investigate. And this is exactly where the first question every liar fears to answer comes in. It's not an accusation. It's not a confrontation. It's simply a request. Describe exactly what happened, in chronological order, without skipping any moment. Seems simple, seems harmless, but this question does something surgical. It forces the person to choose between revealing the truth or starting to improvise details they didn't prepare. Because liars always have a story ready. What they never have ready is the detailed chronology of that story. When you ask for temporal specificity, you force the person's brain to work differently. Those who lived the event can access memory and simply report. Those who are inventing need to build in real time, and the human brain can't do this without leaving traces of inconsistency. Pay attention to what happens when you ask this question. Honest people will start describing naturally, sometimes even correcting small details as they remember better. Liars will do 3 things: hesitate before starting, create a sequence too clean and perfect, or deflect, saying they don't remember details because it's been a while. But you still don't have the complete arsenal, because this first question exposes the structure of the lie, but doesn't prevent the liar from quickly rebuilding a new, more detailed version. For that, you need the second layer of verification. Detailed chronology is just the first filter, because smart people who lie learn fast. After you ask for the sequence of events, they adjust, create a more elaborate version, fill the empty spaces you pointed out, and suddenly the story seems solid again. This is exactly what Machiavelli observed throughout his diplomatic career. False narratives were questioned and quickly transformed into more convincing versions of the same falsehood. But he noticed a weakness that no reconstruction can completely cover: other people. Every real story has external verification points. Witnesses, documents, other versions that can confirm or destroy the narrative, and those who fabricate stories know this. That's why they do something very specific. Avoid mentioning any point where you can verify information with someone besides them. Think about the last time someone told you something dubious. The story was probably told in a way that only that person could confirm. No witnesses, no other sources, just their word against the void. This isn't coincidence, it's strategy. Because those who fabricate narratives know that if they include other people in the story, you can go to those people and discover the version doesn't hold up. Schopenhauer explained this differently in his texts on heuristic dialectic. He showed that professional liars always structure their stories to be unverifiable. They create narratives where you can only accept or reject, but never check. And when you accept without checking, you've lost. The second question every liar fears is even simpler than the first. who else was present and can confirm this version. It's not an accusation that the person is lying. It's just a request for corroboration. But observe what this question does. It transforms a private story into something public, and lies don't survive public exposure. When you ask this question to someone telling the truth, the answer comes immediately. The person cites names, describes who was there, sometimes even suggests you speak with those people to confirm. There's no resistance because there's nothing to hide. The opposite reaction is completely different. First comes hesitation, a small pause but noticeable, then 3 possible answers, saying they were alone at that specific moment, mentioning people who are conveniently no longer accessible, or deflecting, saying other people saw only part of the situation and can't confirm everything. All these responses have something in common. They block external verification. And when someone blocks verification, you already have your answer. Because truths never need to be protected from other perspectives, only lies do. Now you have 2 filters, specific chronology and external verification. But there's something even deeper you need to understand. Because up to here, you're testing the structure of the story. The next level is testing the psychology behind it. There's a point in every lie that's impossible to fabricate convincingly. It's not what happened. It's not who was present. It's the instant of choice. That specific second where the person chose to act in a certain way. And that instant carries something no fabrication can perfectly improvise. The exact emotion and thought that preceded the action. Nietzsche spent years studying how human beings justify their actions after they happen. He realized that people create retroactive narratives, stories that explain why they did what they did, but these stories rarely correspond to what was actually going through their heads at the moment. We reconstruct our motives so they make sense, so they seem noble, so they absolve us. And when someone is lying about an entire situation, this reconstruction becomes even more artificial. Because when you actually make a decision, there's a specific internal process. You consider options, feel something, think something concrete, and then act. This process leaves a mark in memory. You may not remember all the details of an event, but you remember the moment you decided to do something important. What you felt. What made you choose that instead of something else. Liars build actions but rarely build the internal process of those actions. They tell you what they did, tell you why it made sense to do it, but skip the moment of decision. And when you force that moment to appear, the lie starts to crack. Because inventing an action is easy. Inventing the specific mental state that generated that action is extremely difficult. The third question is the most psychological of all. What was the exact moment you made that decision? What did you think immediately before? It's not about the result. It's not about the justification. It's about the specific second where the choice was made and what was happening inside your head in that second. Observe how honest people respond. They go back mentally to that instant. Sometimes they close their eyes for a moment, accessing the memory, and then they describe something specific. I thought I had no other option. I felt afraid of losing that. I remembered something that happened before, and that made me decide. The answer has emotional texture, has genuine hesitation, because the person is really trying to access a past mental state. The opposite answer comes too fast or too vague. Things like, I decided to do the right thing, I thought it was the best option, or I simply acted without thinking much. Generic responses that don't reveal any real internal process. And when you ask for more details, when you ask what exactly doing the right thing means in that situation, the story starts to fall apart. But something's still missing because up to now you're testing memory, verification, and internal process. What comes next tests something deeper, the traceability of the lie. Smart people who lie know how to handle questions about chronology, witnesses, and even their own mental processes. They adjust, elaborate, create layers of plausibility. But there's one thing no one can completely control: external evidence you can access without their participation. Documents, records, other sources of information that exist independently of the narrative they're building. Schopenhauer catalogued 38 stratagems people use to win debates without being right. One of the most effective is what he called protective generalization. It works like this. The person tells a story with enough details to seem real, but structured, so you can never verify those details anywhere. They give you the illusion of specificity without giving the anchor points that would allow confirmation. For example, someone says they sent an important document by email on a specific date, gives details. It was Tuesday morning. Right after a meeting, the email subject was exactly such a thing. Everything seems verifiable, but when you try to check, you discover the email doesn't exist, or existed, but with completely different content, or was sent in another context that changes the whole story. What separates lies from truths at this level isn't the amount of detail, it's the traceability of those details. Truths leave concrete traces that other people or systems can confirm. Lies leave traces that only exist in the liar's narrative. The fourth question does something brutal. It announces checking before checking. If I verify this with this specific source, what exactly will I discover? It's not a threat. It's not an accusation. It's just a warning that you'll confirm the information and you want to know in advance what the confirmation will reveal. Because if the person is telling the truth, they'll simply reaffirm that you'll find exactly what they just told you. But if the person is lying, they need to make a critical decision at that moment. They can maintain the lie and hope you don't actually verify. They can start backing off, creating justifications for why the check might show something slightly different, or they can try to dissuade you from confirming, saying it's not necessary, that you should trust them, that it's a waste of time. All these reactions reveal discomfort. With the possibility of external confirmation, honest people react differently. They see no problem with checking. Sometimes they even encourage it, offering to facilitate access to the source. Because when you're telling the truth, checking only strengthens your position. But the last question is still missing, the one that reveals not the content of the lie, but the intention behind it. The choice of when to reveal something says as much as what is revealed. Not the content of the information, but the moment chosen to share it. Because all information has a natural instant to be shared. When something important happens, honest people tell immediately or explain why they didn't tell before. But those who fabricate stories choose strategically. They wait for the moment where falsehood brings more benefit or causes less damage. And that calculation, that interval between the event and the report, always leaves a mark. Nietzsche wrote extensively about what he called bad faith, that state where the person lies to themselves before lying to others. He realized that human beings are extremely skilled at creating justifications for their actions after they happen. We wait the necessary time to build the narrative that absolves us. And the more time passes between the event and the report, the more opportunity exists for this reconstruction to happen. Think about situations where someone told you something important weeks or months after it happened. And when you ask why they didn't tell before, the person always has a reason. Was processing, didn't think it was relevant, didn't have an opportunity. These justifications can be true, but they can also be evidence that the story was being adjusted over time until reaching a convenient version. The fifth question attacks exactly this. Why are you telling me this now and not before? Seems simple, but observe what it does. It forces the person to explain not just the content of the story, but the revelation strategy. And revelation strategy only exists when there's something to hide or something to gain from the specific instant of revelation. When you ask this question to an honest person, the answer is straightforward. It happened now, so I'm telling you now. Or it happened before, but only now did I have a chance to speak. Or it happened, and I didn't think it was important, but now I realize it is. The answer doesn't carry defensiveness because there's no calculation behind the temporal choice. God, it's just a matter of circumstance. The opposite reaction is different. First, the question catches them off guard because the planning focused on the content of the story, not the justification of its timing. Second, any justification given now needs to make sense within the already constructed chronology. If they said something happened 3 weeks ago and are only telling now, they need to explain why they waited 3 weeks. And that explanation creates one more layer that needs to be sustained. Besides that, the question reveals something deeper. It exposes whether the person is telling you something because they need to or because they want something from you. Lies always have an objective: protection, gain, manipulation. And the moment of revelation is always connected to that objective. When you ask why now, you're really asking what changed that made it necessary or advantageous to tell you this at this specific instant. Now you have the 5 questions: chronology, external confirmation, decision process, traceability, and temporal choice. But having these questions doesn't mean using them always the same way or in any situation. Power without discernment destroys those who use it. You now know how to ask 5 questions that expose lies with surgical precision. But surgical precision requires knowing when to operate and when not to touch. Because these questions aren't casual conversation tools, they're verification instruments. And using verification instruments in every human interaction doesn't make you safer. It makes you isolated. The first objection that arises is obvious. What if I use this with someone who's being genuine and the person feels offended? This concern is valid, but it comes from a misunderstanding about how these questions work. Honest people don't feel attacked by requests for detail. They provide details naturally because they have details to provide. What offends isn't the question. It's the accusatory tone with which it's made. If you ask for chronology, verification, or decision process with genuine curiosity, someone telling the truth will simply answer. There's no offense in seeking understanding. The second objection: won't this seem like an interrogation? It will if you use all 5 questions in sequence, in an investigative tone, with someone who gave you no real reason for suspicion. The error isn't in the questions. It's in the indiscriminate application. You don't need to use all of them always. You need to identify when something isn't making sense and then choose the specific question that tests that specific point. A conversation where you're constantly verifying each statement isn't a conversation. It's a tribunal, and no one wants to live in a permanent tribunal. Third objection: what if I'm wrong and destroy someone's trust without reason? This is the most serious objection because it touches on a real risk. Distrusting without reason corrodes relationships. But observe what these questions actually do. They don't accuse, they verify. If you ask for details and the person provides consistent details that hold up under scrutiny, you didn't destroy trust, you strengthened it. Because now you know that person not only tells the truth but can demonstrate it. The problem only exists if you confuse verification with accusation. Now the operational risks. The first, using confrontational tone, transforms verification questions into personal attacks. The liar immediately realizes they're being tested and activates all the rhetorical defenses Schopenhauer catalogued: emotional deflection, victimization, accusation reversal. You lose the advantage. The second risk, applying this in casual conversations about irrelevant subjects. Someone tells you a funny story that happened at work, and you start asking for detailed chronology. This isn't protection. It's paranoia disguised as method, and there's an ethical risk that needs to be clearly named. These questions can be used to manipulate innocent people, to create traps where there's no lie, just imperfect memory or failed communication. Using verification as a weapon against those who aren't deceiving you doesn't make you more perceptive. It makes you cruel. But when used correctly, at the right moment, with the right person, this protocol does something no other technique can. It transforms you from someone who accepts narratives into someone who demands reality. There's a difference between knowing something and being someone who acts from that knowledge. The 5 questions are now yours. But knowing doesn't change anything if you keep accepting narratives without verifying them. What transforms isn't the information. It's the decision to never again accept versions when it's possible to demand reality. Machiavelli wrote The Prince not as political theory, but as a survival manual. He lived in a Florence where trusting the wrong word could mean exile or death. His techniques weren't philosophical, they were operational. And the difference between someone who survived and someone who was destroyed wasn't in knowledge, but in consistent application of that knowledge. Those who hesitated paid the price. Those who verified survived. A transition is happening now between the person who accepted what they were told because assuming good faith seemed noble and someone who assumes nothing until reality confirms. This transition doesn't happen in a single decision. It happens in the next conversation where something doesn't make sense and the choice arises not to let it pass. From now on, 3 patterns will become automatic. First, whenever someone tells something important, the mind will ask for chronology automatically. You don't need to verbalize always, but the brain will start seeking the sequence of events without conscious effort. Second, confirmation points will appear instinctively. Who can confirm this? What document supports this? Where does this story touch something traceable? Third, reactions to specificity will start saying more than words. Defensive, openness, hesitation. These signals will reveal truth before content, and there's a simple ritual that marks this transformation. Next time someone tells something that generates doubt, pause for 3 seconds before responding. Breathe, and then ask, "Tell me exactly how this happened," without skipping anything. Those 3 seconds aren't a pause, they're control. They're retaking the power to define what's true in your own reality. It's not aggression, it's not neurotic distrust, it's simply refusing to accept less than verifiable truth. Never lose again to those who lie, because you won't enter the game of narrative. Enter the game of confirmation. And in the game of confirmation, only those telling the truth survive. Now you've seen how Machiavelli, Schopenhauer, and Nietzsche built a protocol that crossed centuries. Click the video on the screen. You'll discover how these same philosophers taught using silence as a more powerful weapon than any argument. People who master this technique control conversations without speaking. Click the video on the screen now.